we have Professor Johan Malmqvist from Chalmers University, and at the back we have Michael Gauss from the Norwegian Meteorological Institute. We also invited two people more to attend the panel debate. So because we wanted kind of mixing all this knowledge from research, also maybe with positions that are a little bit more kind of political, you could say, because a lot of these discussions are of course also political at the end of the day, how we regulate and how we also will make new legislation in the future and so on. So we therefore also invited Asbjørn Christensen, acting director at Danish Shipping, as well as Kåre Pras Christensen from the Ecological Council. And I prepared some questions that we will be going through in a while, but I also ask you two guys, since you not have had a presentation so far, just to say some words about who you are and your position in this area.
Well, I'm Kåre Pras Christensen. I work in a Danish NGO called the Danish Ecological Council. We mainly do international work on regulation in IMO and in the EU when we talk regional regulation, like EGA in the Mediterranean, or for example a ban against HFO in the Arctic. And we have very little focus in single member states. We have a little on shore power in North Europe, but a lot of it's mainly international work. And I'm not a full professor, but I teach air pollution at the Technical University of Denmark as well.
My name is Asbjørn Christensen, as mentioned. I'm working with Danish Shipping. It's the Danish Shipowners Association. Presently covering this area as well as a maternity leave post. But for the Danish ship owners, it is crucial for us that we have global regulation. We have had some very good experiences here with the SECA area, and now that we get with the 2020 sulfur cap, it's important for us to have enforcement, that we ensure that there is strong enforcement, and because we of course expect that all our members are following the regulation, and of course to ensure level playing field in international competition, it's important for us to have a strong enforcement. And that's also why we've been working hard to collaborate with both the Ecological Council and Danish authorities, etc., to ensure that we have that both the surveillance and enforcement here in Denmark, but also on the IMO level, of course.
Very good. So today we have learned a lot about the results from the EnviSuM project. During the last 3 years we have looked a lot into what happened before and after SECA was, and also discussed a lot, can we use some of this knowledge for the future, of course, extrapolate that to a global scale. But in the first question I would like to ask you, and I must say I've changed a little bit on the questions. I know I sent you out to you yesterday, but some of the points were evident, so but more or less they're accepted, so you can be relaxed. But in general, I would like to ask you if you think that SECA has been worthy, if it has been a good decision to push for these 0.1 emission limits here in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. Yes.
I can also just start
to
say yes. We believe so. I think we think it's been worth it in the sense that what we also heard here today, that there's been a very positive impact from the regulation, and then we can say it also gave us a lot of good experiences that we can use now for the global regulation.
Yeah, we are on the same boat, so to say. We think it was a very good investment. The cost-benefit analysis made, not only presented here today, but made in many other places, shows it's actually a very good investment to do this. And then, of course, we think that we need to look on other transport ways as well, and when we talk road transport, for example, within the European Union, the sulfur requirement in ordinary diesel is still 100 times lower than the present CETA limit. So to have a fair competition, of course, we think we should have the same regulation for different modes of transport that is fair. So not only a fair competition within shipping, but actually within the different transport modes that shipping compete with. So we think it's a step in the right direction.
Yes, I can only second that point. We need a level playing field, I think they say, between the different transport sectors. But to answer your question from my side, it's also a clear yes, it was worth it. We heard this morning the news about 500 to 2,500 avoided premature deaths. If I remember correctly, the uncertainty range is quite large, but it of course depends on how much we value these deaths. We can say, of course, as long as it's not me, I don't care, but I think it's a very important step into the right direction. What we did not talk that much about was ecosystem health, because that is also an important point that we haven't studied in much detail. Sari showed a few results about acidification and eutrophication and nitrogen deposition on the soils that is reduced. And if we take all these things into account, we get a significant and clear, statistically robust signal into the right direction. As I already said this morning, it's not a breakthrough, because by addressing one sector only, we cannot hope for a major breakthrough. But since, as I said, every sector has to make their contributions to go into the right direction, I think the shipping industry has done that in 2015, and I hope we'll continue to make steps into the right direction also next year in the years that come.
Yeah, if I may, I also have the opinion that this was a good thing, even if assessing only the impacts on humans. So basically looking at it only from the human perspective or point of view. We didn't talk about that much about the impacts on nature or to the animal or any other life form than humans. So basically this becomes relevant if you are trying to, for example, assess the shipping in a holistic manner, not only about the air emissions but also discharges and noise. Then the impacts on humans is less of an issue on that side. But even if we do it in a way that only assesses the impact of shipping on human populations, and it is already showing that this is a good thing, then I would feel also that this is something worthwhile.
Well, yes, on my side as well, but I was also quite happy, and there's not been any discussion also not today, that it was a regional and not global, so that was a very strong point in the earlier debate, but it's been forgotten. So obviously that it was not global was not so much of a problem anyway. So somebody has to start. If the processes are slow, and sometimes you just can't get everybody on board immediately, so somebody has to show the way. And I think Baltic Sea region and Baltic Sea and North Sea, they have shown it, that it can be done, and everything, business thrives, and we have a cleaner air. So sometimes you just have to be bold and go on.
Okay, I second everything that was said. Of course, this was the important thing. Another opinion, which is a personal opinion, is really that if you go back 20 years in time, the shipping sector was kind of old-fashioned and was not so much. I mean, there was like no improvements at all. While on land, we've been really struggling hard to improve everything all the time. So I think it's sort of a modern. It's the only direction you can go is to improve. And okay, now we are a little ahead of the rest of the world, and maybe that's even good, because maybe it's a competitive advantage in the end that we are before everybody else, and we could still afford it. And we see that there are benefits from health. Maybe they are not so. I mean, maybe you think it's not so much. That's, I mean, how much is 500 lives worth, 1,000 and so on? I mean, there are other people saying there's 4 million people dying from air quality things, and how much is 1,000 then, and so on. And of course, this is in the context of comparing all other air quality problems that we have. So, for instance, we talked about St. Petersburg in our meeting yesterday. There was that it was very little benefit. Actually, the modeling claimed there was very little benefit from doing this. But when I looked into the data, they had huge emissions from other sources that had not been regulated so far, it looks like. So of course, yeah. So I think it's a modern way of improving. It's the only direction we can take, and you can discuss details.
Now we touched a little bit upon that we're ahead in the SECA area compared to the global cap. Can you point a little bit about what we can learn from SECA? Where are we ahead? What knowledge have we gained by this project that can be applied on a global scale?
I can start. I think that, for instance, the compliance part is something that is we were the first doing it. Then it's spreading now in Europe, and we are even starting to standardize ways of doing measurements jointly. And it's not being done in China. They are coming and copying a little, in northern United States. So I think from that point of view, that's one issue. I think there's many others.
Yeah, there are many, and of course also the use of technologies like scrubbers, of course, is one vital point. I think we have been actually had the experience in utilizing that and testing and see how that works in this area, and again. And of course, there's still the difference between 0.1 and 0.5 after 1st of January as well. And I guess, of course, there are some ship owners out there that need to, of course, adjust to that as well. So I think there's some good experience that we have learned.
I don't have much to add, but one thing, I think that, of course, we might have some compliance challenges in 2020, but what we can learn from the SECA is that most ships are actually in compliance. It's still not a good business case, I would claim, to be in compliance with the SECA, because the chance of getting caught is extremely small. And even if you get caught, your fines are much lower than what you have saved just on one trip. So, but still, we see more than 95% compliance. So we can hope, maybe not learn, but hope that the same will be the global picture next year.
Yeah, just continue. From a climate and air pollution scientist's point of view, we learned how reductions in emissions affect air quality over the marine areas and also in coastal zones and further inland. Fortunately, physical and chemical laws that apply to the Baltic Sea, they also apply to the Mediterranean Sea and to other regions of the world. So from the results we gained in EnviSuM, we can make assumptions also for the Mediterranean, and they also apply, all those laws also apply in 2020, I can promise you that. And so we can even make future predictions based on what we learned from EnviSuM.
I would also say that since the Paris MOU, that is a kind of regulating the port state control in Europe, and also in Russia and Canada are part of those. So we can still kind of set an example that how can we work together with the compliance monitoring. So if there is a signal which is abnormally high on sulfur, then there is a mechanism how to convey that information to other partners of the MOU. So that's one thing. Second thing is that even if you are early on these regulations, it kind of creates an incentive to develop something new. So, for example, scrubbers in the case of SECAs. So you have major manufacturers in Europe So that's one thing. So it's clearly also a kind of a competitive advantage in that sense. Although it may be that the ship owners in the Baltic Sea may feel a kind of, well, let's say that they don't like the idea that, okay, they would have to comply with the stricter rules and regulations, whereas somebody else doesn't. So stepping outside of the SECAs. So this was the kind of feedback that I heard many times several years ago. But I think now it's changing because also the rest of the world have to follow. So we have some experience that we have collected through the 5 recent years. So this is valuable in my mind.
And I would also, as a scientist, like to see SECA as a kind of an example of knowledge-based decision making. So somebody was also listening to a scientist saying that this will be a big thing, and it happened to be so. So we can learn that decision makers can learn that you should listen to scientists. So if there's a kind of that many scientists are of the same opinion, so you can trust that.
We have talked, and you also just entered that arena a little bit about how we can secure an efficient enforcement, how we will go global. A lot of this stuff is open sea and so on. Do you have any views on how we could secure an efficient enforcement of the global cap?
I don't think I have a silver bullet, but of course the carriage ban will be extremely important to enforce. And then I believe more and more that we need some kind of device imagingly connected to the AIS system, showing if they are in compliance with the sulfur NOx regulation, because that might be the only way forward. There are places on this world where you might bunker fuel with another quality, an unofficial quality compared to what it says on the fuel note. But I have no silver bullet.
When it comes to, I mean, in this project and in some other projects, we have airborne techniques and we have techniques that can be on fixed stations. So, of course, Atlantic travel is a problem and Pacific Ocean. On the other hand, there is not so much traffic there if you look at the density of traffic. So if you could cover the coasts of Africa and all of the other places, traffic-wise, it's not so much left. Of course, it's a discussion how to do that there, and then we can talk about high-flying drones and things like that. That, like, if you'd like to, we have the ban, of course, which is I also agree on. This is a really efficient thing, and I think it's a toolbox how to deal with that Atlantic travel. But I think many of the techniques that we developed and which can even be made cheaper can cover most of the ship intensive, where the ship traffic is actually, since I don't think the Atlantic is such a big problem as you may think.
Yeah, and this brings me back to the comments that Paul made about this legal complications. So this is definitely an interesting challenge. So I see a lot of lawyers thinking their heads through with this. Yes, it gets trickier further away from the coastline you get. So this is a challenge also for them. So it's a kind of an indication that, okay, this is a problem which has a kind of technical aspect, whether we can rely on sensors or satellites or drones, but it's also a challenge from many other sectors. It's not just about the science. So it's also, especially on the legal side, this is going to be a tricky thing to tackle.
That how is it going with the satellite? Will it work at some point?
It will be very interesting to see indeed, and yes, I totally agree with everything that's been said on the carriage ban, definitely, and it's really to be seen, because it's also, I mean, even though that, as you also mentioned earlier, that even though it's the risk of getting caught in the sick area is so small. We still have such a high compliance, so it will be interesting to see actually how it evolves after 1st of January next year. But of course, also when you look at the type of fines, the kind of punishment that you see around the world, Singapore talking about imprisonment, other places talking about small fines, etc. It will be very interesting to see, and also see how that will evolve over time, and especially also how we will enforce it here in Denmark as well. So I think we will be looking at that time, and of course also trying to we need to also spread. We encourage training internationally, etc. So we ensure that we do actually have, especially in countries, developing countries, etc., that they actually have the ability also to do the right enforcement. That's of course also crucial.
One small addition, what we're discussing very much in the NGO environment now is to engage with insurance companies and large funds like the Norwegian Oil Fund to make sure they don't insure companies that are taken for several violations. Of course, shit might happen once, but I mean, if it's systematic, so you can maybe cheat us that way. That might be a possibility. We were very much involved in the Volkswagen case. That's another story. And now the country is really paying a lot of attention because it really damaged the reputation of Volkswagen. But they only go for the large global players, of course.
So you're considering some kind of registry in that sense, or?
I mean, now we decided the name and shame, or it's not been decided, but the law is out now. So name and shame in Denmark, and that might be a way forward to make sure that the companies systematically cheating, they cannot have the insurances that other companies can have. They cannot have the same investors, or investors will not invest in their companies. I think the Norwegian Oil Fund actually skipped investing in some companies that did illegal scrapping in Bangladesh. So it is already seen in other areas in shipping.
There is. I mean, I know in California they have been doing this compliance monitoring for more than 10 or 15 years, and I know that then they go on board and they check in the ship computer, and they check what is the log, the temperature, and they check all the stuff, so they can go back at least several days, and it's really a good indicator that whether there was when the shift of fuel was done or not done and so on. I know in Europe somehow they have decided not to do that because it's a debate on, I don't know, temperature and so on. So, but I think there are indicators that you can use at least to gather information if something strange seems to be going on, or if it's, it's a worry if you see that there was a lot of the temperature of the oil went from 130 degrees to 30. There's an indicator that they were using high sulfur fuel, obviously. So there might be other ways to check this as well.
A thought came into my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the airplanes, you have a kind of a blacklist which ban certain companies for flying to EU, for example. So is there any chance of establishing kind of blacklisting of non-compliant vessels?
I don't think the IMO would just take such a step. Then it should be maybe a regional area like they would decide, but it would be in conflict with I think some IMO rules to deny ships to enter. Then we need to change our IMO rules. I'm not against it. It's of course a suggestion. It will take time in IMO, the discussions taken into account. But of course it might be a way. I mean, in that kind of say, let's first see if it works, and then of course if it doesn't work, we need to say it doesn't work in IMO, and then we need to think about that. But usually the IMO decides regulations, and then leave it to the flag states to actually enforce it. They don't enforce, they regulate flag states, not ships. But it should be decided, of course, on a high level. Maybe they could decide to put very high port fees for some ships that violate the regulation, and then try to make a European law on that. That would probably that would be faster at least.
But actually, in this room about a year ago, we had a discussion about the law aspects of SECA and the global cap. And then we had a professor, a Swedish law professor, talking about the role of the port state and the flag state, because it's always, as you also pointed out, normally it will be the flag state when you're in open sea, and if the flag state is not interested in punishing their own ship owners, then that would be a problem. But actually, the port state will be able to punish ships also on open sea if they have done something against the global rules there. So there is actually a possibility for that. At least according to this professor. Then I have another question, which is whether we are regulating emissions the right way. I think at least what I learned, and I'm not a researcher, but what it was evident for me in the discussions in the EnviSuM project was that we talked a lot about, of course, sulfur, because that was the rule. But as it turns out, when it comes to health effects, then, for instance, small particles are actually very dangerous. And these have not been regulated in the same way. So maybe we're not looking at it holistically, as far as I understand.
Indirectly we do, because the small particles are formed from the sulfates and the NOx. It actually contributes more to particulate matter than the primary particle in from the ships. So indirectly we are, but a better NOx regulation could definitely be a good idea if you want to get rid of the secondary particles formed in the atmosphere. But you're right, there's no particle regulation. All new trucks have since 2014 within the European Union closed particulate filters, and since 2004 SCR. So there the shipping is just leaking behind, but it will come. But indirectly, as I said, it is taken into account.
I mean, there's this thing with the particles, and there's like VOCs coming from ships and so on that is like hidden away, doesn't exist because we don't have the particle filter. So I always wonder why there's no particle filters in ships. And I had some discussions today. Someone told me it was a safety thing, and I wonder if that cannot be overcome. You cannot have a particle if they plug the filters, then suddenly the ship cannot operate anymore, and that can be dangerous, of course. But of course, there's another thing with particles, regulation with particles, and they are so difficult to measure. A gas is easy to measure. Particles, they are very dependent on what kind of mode of operation, and they are in many types of forms, and they cannot be measured directly. There are machines that measure them, and there's, for instance, when it comes to black carbon, which there has been already a discussion in the IMO, whether you can have some regulation in the Arctic, for instance. You can't decide on the method how to measure it, because there are so many different measures, and so it's a technical discussion, and someone says it's light properties, someone says it's how they absorb energy, someone says how much carbon there is, and so on and so on. So I think it's a technical problem also when it comes to particles.
We had the same discussion in the EU when we need to regulate particulate matter from trucks and diesel cars 16 years ago. But there, many people, they disagreed on the measuring method. Like in IMO, we do on black carbon, but everybody agreed that closed particulate filters remove it all. So I think we actually don't need to focus so much on the measurement method. If we agree that there's a technology removing it all, I mean, then it should be quite straightforward, seen with my eyes. I think in the IMO, half of the discussion is actually flag states organizations putting these cards on the table to more or less delay regulation, to be honest. Because if you agree on the solution, then the measuring method might not be that important. But we have in Denmark actually EnviSuM equipped with a particular filter, and then we have a bypass valve, so even if the filter clocks, you can go and then actually continues. In aviation, we discuss particular filter, and that is definitely a safety issue. I mean, of course, the plane will get down.
And we heard today that we will all die at the end.
Yes.
Life is short and then you die.
Then I would like to open the floor for questions. Paul?
Without a mic, huh? That's
Yes.
fine. I can do it without a mic.
Well, there was a unanimous agreement that it was a good idea about the Sega. And if you go in and take a Rolls Royce and get from A to B, you actually achieve what you want to do, but it may not necessarily be the smartest way of achieving it. And you really didn't discuss that. Could we have achieved the same thing in a smarter way? Could we have spent the money better than what we actually are doing?
Well, we didn't know we would have the 0.5% sulfur cap, at least not from 2020 when we decided to introduce the SECA. But now when we have the 0.5% sulfur cap from 2020, in my world, a requirement for SCR on all ships in the SECA. Of course, I would like both, but if I should choose, then that would definitely make even more sense from a health perspective. But again, we didn't know it was the 2020 when we decided to SECA, so it's not to say, but SCR is very important to reduce NOx.
I would also say that you need some sort of a stick or a carrot. But if things are only done in a voluntary basis, nothing will happen. But whether it was a smart way of doing this, well, if okay, let's say if you have a series of options, then of course, if you investigate all of those and rule out the immediately the ones which are not feasible, then what you are left with is a smaller group of options which could be thought of. Maybe this kind of thing. I was not involved in this. Let's say that when the decisions to establish the first SECA were made at the IMO. I don't know the background history from that time, but well, I'm sure that things can always be done in a smart way. But it's always easier to look back and see what could have been done differently. But I agree that if you are establishing a new rule, you should also consider the possible options, how to comply and how to do it in a smart way. But maybe you have the history, so what happened with the establishment of the first SECA in the Baltic, so what was the discussion then? So were there any other options than forcing ships to use the low sulfur fuel considered?
Before my time.
But I am old. I'm not older, but no. I remember that time. But maybe I'm provocative now. But I remember that everybody thought it would be 0.5. I mean, and the whole shipping industry was like, oh, it's 0.5. We don't have to care, you know. And suddenly it was 0.1 overnight because that story, you know, was a Corvette and there was something that made it 0.1, and suddenly the shipping industry started to say, oh, why didn't you do the consequence? Think about how to do this in a smart way. Then suddenly it got interesting because there was much more money and things involved. Before it was just mixing some heavy fuel oil with something. So I think it's like a combination. It's everybody's. It's not. it's society's fault. It's how it emerged, and it was the 0.1 that really made it. Afterwards, it was not so. They didn't think things through because it was not pushed that it should be so.
I mean, of course, you could reach the same goal in different ways. The same reduced number of premature mortality and all that in different ways. And you can always discuss if there's a more optimal or cost-efficient way to achieve it, and there might be. But I think we saw here that it was a positive investment from a cost-benefit point of view. And I just think that there are many other things that are cost-efficient when we talk reducing air pollution. And if you stand between 5 different issues and you can actually afford all 5 of them and they are cost-efficient, meaning that the marginal reduction cost is lower than the marginal damage cost, then you should theoretically do all 5 of them from a pure economic point of view, if you can afford them. So I think it's not the one or the other. If they are both feasible investments, you will do them. DFDS would probably do the same. If they had the money, there was 5 feasible investments, you do all 5 of them. Yes.
I think we have had a question in the back.
Yeah, I'm good at shouting. So how do you see in your field of study, how much has this, Johan and Jukka-Pekka have been in this field, for example, for a very, very long time. So how much do you see that this regulation has pushed the fields of study and the technology and everything like that forward? Because we see that when it came reality that the alignment methods will be required and things like that, there was a lot of investment then in R&D in this field, and I guess the same has happened in a bit with the ship models and then kind of the atmosphere or kind of measurement of ship pollution in a whole. So how much do you see? Do you see now that the global limits will let's say continue the efforts that now we'll see, let's say, more push on the technological side to tackle the global monitoring efforts and this and that?
Yes, the answer is yes. I mean, it's the reason why there could be funding available to develop some monitoring techniques. That was because the SECA was coming. I mean, I remember I started already in 2000. Somebody at the transport agency told me there's a SECA coming and you have to fix a method. Oh, okay. And then and then eventually I started to work with that, and money became available, and now it's abatement technology at the same time in parallel. So I think that absolutely the legislation is a driver for development. It's the key. Otherwise, there would be no reason to do monitoring of what
Another thing we didn't discuss much today is that when we have the global regulation coming into force, it will increase bunker fuel prices with, of course, we don't know how much yet, but maybe 40%. That will really motivate shipping to save fuel. That will be a huge driver of reducing, for example, speed, and so it's a huge fuel savings, and that will in itself reduce air pollution. We discussed a lot if we could put a global tax on bunker fuel to motivate shipowners to install new technologies. We will never, or hopefully we will once agree on that. But this is actually the only time in shipping history where we put a huge levy or huge tax indirectly on shipping fuel, increasing it by about 40%, depending on where it will end. And that will really motivate you huge fuel savings and emission savings. And I think that's a very important point of this. It was not the target, but it's a very important side effect, positive side effect.
Tell a story of the things how I started this modeling work. So basically, I came to FMI in 2006. So that was the kind of time when I was given 2.5 days of AIS data. And we were trying to figure out how to read it. So that's where it all started. But shipping has traditionally been, from the air quality point of view, it's been a kind of a black hole. So you have your chemical transport model results, and you're comparing the concentrations of PM against measurements, and then you have a discrepancy. And the old way of doing that was that, okay, we don't know much about ships, so we maybe multiply this emission inventory by a certain number, and we get it closer, because nobody really knows what happens in the seas. But now things are completely different with AIS. So you have every vessel, you can track it, you can see where it goes and predict how much it emits. So I would say that from the air quality point of view, the shipping is one of the best known emission sectors now. So you cannot say the same thing about, for example, for land-based traffic. So if you can track every car, then yes, maybe you can get up to the same level. But this is where I started. So it was a kind of an explosion of data in the Baltic Sea where we started, and now we can cover the whole world. So that was a huge step forward in that regard.
What if this 14% become a negative side effect? It increase the freight rate.
Sorry, once more.
What if this 40% become a negative side effect and increase the freight rate?
It will increase the freight rate. Of course, we're going to pass it on. So let's take it. Our iPad transported from Far East Asia to Rotterdam. What is actually the price, the shipping costs of that iPad? Is it 6 euro cent? Let's assume this regulation will increase this transport price by 40%. So it will be 10 euro cent. 4 euro cent more. Will I buy an iPad less? I don't think so. But of course, there could be bulky products where you transport it to developing countries where it will be higher, and that needs to be taken into account. So we need to maybe increase the support for these countries. That's another issue, of course, because wheat and so is expensive to sail around. But that must be solved in another way, I think.
Do you think that it can relate to a new shipping crisis?
No, I don't think so, because they will pass on the costs directly to the customers, and they will pay, and it will be such a price increase for us end consumers. It will be me paying it. So you could say the shipping cost is typically, when we talk very bulky products, so worst case is maybe 1%, and that's very bulky products like wine from New Zealand and so. And I don't think that will change consumers' behaviors, at least not in this part of the world. No, in this part. And then we discussed a lot in Greenland, for example, where there are poor societies, they just made an analysis. What would it cost to ban HFO in Greenland? How much extra would it cost per person in Greenland every year? They need to use this in Greenland state of HFO. And it was calculated it would be, with the present bunker fuel prices, $3 per person. But when we have the new bunker fuel prices in 2020, the difference would be much smaller, maybe half $1 per person in Greenland. Of course, that can mean something for somebody but in reality, I don't think that would be the huge problem, because we'll benefit from this air pollution as well.
Any comments? No.
I think we have less than 8 months to January 1, 2020. So my question is the global community, I mean international shipping, prepare for the sulfur cap 2020 as of date?
If the global shipping
If the global shipping community is prepared, or the industry is prepared for the rules the 1st of January.
It's a difficult question to answer. I think the Danish shipping industry is, but yeah, I think it's a difficult question to answer for the global. It has definitely been talked about a lot, and a lot of initiatives have been taken, and a lot of guidance have been produced from different associations, organizations. So yeah, we can only encourage. Yeah, maybe let's see on the 1st of January.
But I mean, there is this issue with fuel also, that there's supplies, and there will be a competition with the marine gas oil and on traffic on land and so on. So that, I mean, it's not, and that might be a complication in some parts of the world that we don't know about. And the second thing that I'd like to comment on is that somehow the SECA turned out with very good compliance very early on. And I remember before the SECA, everybody said that, 1/3 or 2/3 will cheat because there's no way getting caught. And I still don't understand the psychology. How come that the whole shipping industry was so quick in turning? Because there's so much benefits in not obeying the rules. And I think that one of the answers is that the oil price changed so much, so it got so low, so it was the same price.
So they were used to.
So it was the same. It wasn't passed on to anyone. You know, it was like the same price, but running clean instead. But that might not happen in the 2020 thing, because then the prices would probably go up. And so I think it's not totally the same thing.
I'm taking a risk now. I'm not an expert in the shipping industry at all. I was impressed by Paul's presentation. I really acknowledge these are serious problems, and I'm sure that it will be a bumpy ride until January 2020 and also in the months beyond. But history is full of examples where things like that happened. People were very concerned before, especially industry, and then somehow things were sorted out. So being an optimist, I think it will happen also in this case, and in maybe 3 or 4 years from now, nobody will talk about that anymore. And we will sit here again and say that, yeah, this global sulfur cap was great, and we avoided lots of premature deaths. And yeah, that's what I hope, and I think there's a good likelihood for that to happen, judging by history.
And again, what is the alternative? That is no regulation. We have many UN regulation of air pollution. The Göteborg Protocol just being one regulating air pollution from all different UN states. And I mean, the UN cannot force the member states to actually fulfill it. And not everybody fulfills it, but if we had no regulation, definitely nobody would fulfill it. And then we would have no environmental improvements. So I guess sometimes you need to accept that they do regulation without having the silver bullet for making sure everybody is in compliance, and then cross your fingers and do the best to make everybody compliant.
And please remember to say your name and where you come from.
My name is Huy. I'm from Vietnam. I'm studying at World Maritime University. My question is the number of sulfur content is CK we start 2007 1.5%, and then 3 years later 2010 is 1, and 5 years later is 0.1. So now it's 2019. Is nothing changed for the sulfur content. Do you think you will reduce more, and how will you come up to the number 0.1? I mean, how you identify the sulfur content, the limit, and in the future we want to reduce more.
Are we still talking about sulfur? So we will see lower limit values from here. 0.05.
I don't know. I mean, there was just a large cost-benefit study made for a Mediterranean Sega, where you will go from 0.5 to 0.1, and that's a very good business case. And then your question is, does it then pay to move even further? Well, if you look upon road diesel, we use in the diesel truck and all EU here in the streets, the requirements have been 0.001 since 2010. But that road diesel is actually not much more expensive than 0.1% fuel. There's not a huge price difference. If it pays to go down to that, I've not done the calculation, I must admit, because of course the health benefits are much smaller because the reductions are smaller, but the price increase is very small as well, but I didn't do the calculation. But it would be easier to have particulate filters if you use road diesel in your ships than if you use 0.1. It is possible with 0.1, but you have a much lower ash content in your filter if you use 0.001. So I think we'll first see that when we start talking particulate filters.
I think what we'll also see is that we are heading towards 2030, then 2050. We have a decarbonization agenda as well with the strategy for limiting the greenhouse gas emissions, which means that there will come new fuel types. There will be other types of various types of propulsion for the shipping industry, which I believe that we will also see lower emissions in other areas as well. So I think it's difficult to of course predict the future, but we might see a future where we will not be sailing around with the same type of fuels in 10 to 15 years. Anyway,
and when it comes to this, that it's much lower in the normal diesel, I don't think it's from correct me if I'm wrong, I might be wrong, but I don't think it's from an environmental perspective. I think it's because you pollute some of the catalysts and stuff like this, that you want to have low sulfur. So I'm not sure if they've done, if there's like how much it would influence if we had a little higher sulfur in trucks, but I might be wrong there.
Now, what I'm thinking that is it kind of wise politically to pursue a lower limit on the SECA, or would it be more wiser to concentrate on the greenhouse gas reduction, because you have only so much of political will. I'm not sure if you can spend it on both, but if you would have to choose, then I would go for the greenhouse gas reduction.
So time is actually running out. I think we should give the panel a big hand. And we will be sending the slides out from the presentations today. We will also be, as you might have seen, we have taped everything, so if any one of you would not like this to be spread on the internet, then please tell me. Otherwise, both the presentations and the panel debate will be made available and also be sent out. That might not be tomorrow, as we expect to send out the slides tomorrow. And we will also be sending out a report on the conclusions from this 3-year project, EnviSuM project, that we will also make available to you. So I will just say thank you both to you and also to all the speakers, as well as you for attending today, and have a safe trip home. Thank you.